welcome to Cookwell video number 7. We're making a yam stew today, and it's got 2 different kinds of beans in it, black beans and black-eyed peas, 2 different kinds of sea vegetable. It has the kombu and wakame, and some really good ground spices that are great in Boston baked beans recipes as well, and that's where I got this combination from. It's ground cumin, ground coriander, ground mustard, and a little bit of cayenne. So we did about 2 parts cumin to like 1.5 coriander to maybe 1 part ginger to maybe 1/2 of a part cayenne pepper. And we're gonna put that all in our bean stew right now, because our beans have been, those beans, black beans and black-eyed peas, take about an hour to cook. So at the point in time where we're about 10 minutes out from that, so they've been on the boil on a low simmer for about 40 minutes. We're gonna, or 50 minutes, sorry about that. We're now gonna add our root vegetables, which in this case it's yam, but we could be using carrot or parsnip or burdock root, or any of our dense root veggies are gonna go in with our ground spices to cook for about 10 minutes. And what we'll be talking about in this video are culturing grain and meat and why it's important, and raw foods, kind of the raw food craze, and why it works for some people really well and why it doesn't work for other people. And maybe certain times a year that it's better for the body than others. And we're also going to talk about the Self-Healing Cookbook, which I keep recommending everyone through these videos, and Healing with Whole Foods by Paul Pitchford. And the reason I say Boston baked beans with this is because it's going to have a couple cans of diced tomatoes and some tomato paste, but also the balsamic vinegar. So the ground mustard, ground cumin, and balsamic vinegar and tomato is classic for Boston baked beans, and it's so good. You're gonna love it. Oh, and at the very end we could add marjoram or tarragon or dill. And today we're gonna add tarragon. So we're gonna let these spices simmer in here for a good 10 minutes with the yam. And I'll put the lid back on. And then when we're about maybe 2 minutes out, we'll add our mustard greens and chopped celery. And you could do bok choy, you could do green beans, any vegetables you want. But I find that celery and mustard greens really set off the ground mustard flavor with the balsamic and the tomatoes. So these are just vegetables that I've found over time work really great with this ground spice combination. And we're also going to add, of course, shoyu, soy sauce, which I've gotten from my health food store in bulk. That's why I have my own container labeled. It's about 64 cents an ounce, and this is a 16-ounce container. And we'll add real butter. Some Organic Valley. It's a great organic brand of butter. Very important to get all animal products organic. And because we don't have much butter, I do half and half with olive oil. So half olive oil, half butter. Oh, and then lemon at the end if people like that, more of a sour tart flavor. So we're going to talk about culturing flours and steel-cut oats. So we do this for the same reason that we soak all of our whole grains. And remember the phytic acid that's in all whole grains, if they're not pre-toasted or soaked or cultured, it will bind with minerals in your intestines and inhibit their absorption. So the way to neutralize it with the grains, which I've talked about in a previous video with the whole grains, is simply soaking. And you can soak for up to 48 hours. 24 to 48 hours is ideal. And of course replacing that soak water, because as they sprout and become alive and become more nutritious for us, they produce a lot of nitrogen, and the nitrogen goes into the water. So we want to rinse that old soak water off. But in regards to using flours for baking, you can take 2 cups of any kind of whole flour, like whole wheat flour or whole spelt flour, and mix it with a cup of yogurt and 1/2 cup of water. And it'll make this dough-like consistency but you want to mix it until just blended. So 2 cups flour to 1 cup yogurt and half a cup of water, maybe a little more water if it's not getting wet all the way through, and let it sit in a bowl for 24 hours at room temperature. And those live bacteria in the yogurt, the live cultures, will start breaking down the complex carbohydrates in the flour or steel cut oats. You can do it with either or. And start neutralizing that phytic acid and breaking down the complex carbohydrates to make it more available to you, more assimilatable and digestible. It's basically easier to digest, so you can uptake the nutrients more easily. And in regards to steel cut oats, I just take a couple, maybe 3 tablespoons of yogurt with however much steel cut oats I want to prepare, maybe a cup, cup and a half, and another cup of water. So I'll get those steel cut oats till they're in a little bit of a liquidy texture, and I'll add a couple dollops of yogurt, just plain live yogurt, cultured yogurt, and let that sit for 24 hours. And then the next day I'll add a little more water, maybe another cup or so, so that there's about twice as much water to steel cut oats, and then I'll bring it to a boil and let it simmer for a half hour, and they come out. So the porridge it makes is a different texture than other prepared foods. It's really wonderful. It's great for people who have a hard time digesting or are sick and coming back from an illness, and you want it, the food to be real nourishing and easy to digest. That's one of the other reasons for culturing flours. And you can culture your meats as well with either yogurt or kefir. And what you can do is take like pork loin or a piece of organic, grass-fed beef, and put it in a Ziploc bag with yogurt or kefir all over it, and let that sit in the fridge for a day, even 2 days. And those probiotics, those live bacteria, will start to break down the meat. They'll start to pre-digest it for you. And when you cook it, and then you can cook it in the crock pot all day long for an even more of like a fall off the bone effect. It becomes very digestible and easy for the body to uptake the nutrients in that way. I came up with this talk that I give to groups, and I hit on how a lot of different cultures, traditions, have done the fermentation of their grains and meats over, for thousands of years. They've been doing this. They kind of intuitively knew to pre-soak and pre-culture their grains before they ate them. And I got the information from Nourishing Traditions by Sally Fallon. She talks about why these indigenous and ancestral people have far fewer diseases than most modern North Americans do. But also they eat regionally and seasonally, which is a macrobiotic premise. It's like, in nature, what would you most naturally have access to in your, maybe 20 square mile radius, and seasonally, eat seasonal vegetables that grow naturally at that time of year. So whole grains and vegetables are the basis of these indigenous people's diets, and they usually sprout or ferment their grains. So, and we talked about why, with neutralizing phytic acid and making them more assimilatable and digestible. But people who eat sprouted or fermented grains as a staple have strong teeth and bones late into life. Like the Vikings made their cultured sourdough, and they didn't have degenerative bone loss and tooth decay like we do. Because in America now, we've been so many generations of us have been eating the processed milled grains. Like, one, it's stripping the bran off of the whole grain and taking all those vitamins out, but then that they're skipping that step of sprouting or fermenting means that the phytic acid is also pulling minerals from us. So it's kind of a big thing, and it takes just 24 hours thinking ahead a little bit for this wonderful, wonderful, satisfying, digestible, assimilatable meal the next day. So I'd encourage you to do that. But the Vikings and other European cultures fermented their wheat flour to make sourdough, and the American pioneers were famous for their sourdough breads, pancakes, and biscuits. And the African natives and the Welsh ferment corn or millet for several days to make porridges. And in India, rice and lentils are fermented to make idli and dosas. And many Asian and Latin American traditions call for fermenting rice before it's prepared. Oh, and the Native Americans soaked their corn with lime water for days before it was ground. We're talking like 3 or 4 days. And the Mexican corn cakes are made from fermented corn. So there's that, and if you really want to read about it, again, Sally Fallon's Nourishing Traditions is a great book for that. I want to talk about the raw fad right now. I've noticed that several of my friends who have tried a 100% raw diet, where they're not having the whole grains, but they're eating more nuts and seeds and raw vegetables and fruits and dried fruits. I think about like 80% of them get weak and tired and have uncomfortable digestion. So what I've read in my books on macrobiotics is that a 100% raw food diet is particularly cooling, contractive, and hard to digest. So I'm going to read here from you a little bit about this, and it's quite interesting. So in referring to digestive fire or Agni, each of us has a different amount of digestive fire or Agni, as it's referred to in Ayurveda, which is the East Indian tradition of eating and living in harmony with nature. So where one person may be able to eat some of everything offered at a buffet, another person may need to carefully apply the principles of proper food combining and eat mostly cooked foods, because cooked foods are a lot easier to digest. And we'll talk about enzymes too, because a lot of the raw food people, they tout that the importance of the raw food diet is because the enzymes remain intact. You're not killing those live enzymes which aid in digestion. But our pancreas also produces enzymes for us to help digest. And I incorporate a little bit of raw food, maybe a couple sticks of celery or a salad, and much more of that in the summertime. And I do that at the end of the meal, because you don't want your stomach to think that you're digesting lettuce or celery. The first few bites of food, according to food combining, should be something higher in protein and on the salty side to kind of prime the pump so your stomach puts out a stronger acid to digest those foods. Okay, so according to both macrobiotics and Ayurveda, 100% raw food diet year-round is particularly cooling, contractive, and difficult for most people to digest. So soaked and thusly sprouted and simmered whole grains provide an easily digestible, long-lasting energy source that's gentle on the digestive system. And the whole grains lie more toward the middle of the extremes of the yin and yang spectrum and help us maintain balanced blood sugar, hormones, and body chemistry. So in balance, whole grains comprise the basis of the diet around which more extreme parts of the diet revolve. So the more extreme parts would be the concentrated nuts and seeds. So you think about the protein in pumpkin seeds or sesame seeds or sunflower seeds. It's sort of like a dormant, it's like the seed is, it's this contracted state. And then when it sprouts and becomes alive and becomes a plant into the vegetable state, it's then more in its sort of the middle phase of its life, and it's not so contractive. They also say, I've read this, that 100% raw food diet can lend itself to anger, to storing anger and heat in the liver. So check in with your own body on that, but I would recommend, if you want to do a raw food diet for cleansing purposes, like if you've been diagnosed with cancer or any other illness that you've read a raw food diet can reverse or help, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever the protocol is for you for doing that, and then to start incorporating your simmered whole grains, your soaked and sprouted grains and vegetables after that. And for most of us, maybe a week or so of raw foods in the summertime when it's really hot outside, because those foods are so cooling for us. If you're living in a tropical climate, is also another perfect situation for more raw vegetables, and tropical fruits are extremely cooling to the body, because nature knows best, those tropical fruits grow in really hot climates. I do want to talk a little bit about Self-Healing Cookbook and Healing with Whole Foods. This is a wonderful beginning. It's a primer for these principles of eating seasonally, regionally. But this book has helped me so much, and it was I actually got it after I got this big, huge authoritative text on macrobiotics, but she has a wonderful way of making these principles really understandable and accessible with all these wonderful charts and drawings. And she connects food with moods and whether they're warming or cooling or expansive or contractive, or that if they cause energy in the body to ascend or descend. And I love this chart here. This is the yin-yang expansive contractive spectrum, where we have sugar and tropical fruits and alcohol and chemicals on the right side, or this expansive yin side, and way on the other, the extreme is the salt and meat and things like eggs. But so if we're eating over here, like a lot of the raw food diets they eat the extreme sweet and the extreme salty, that we're swinging our blood sugar and thusly our body chemistry and brain chemistry and hormones all day long, sort of on this. Everything rides off blood sugar. So the way to really keep your body in a more of a even keel, I guess you could say, is to eat more up in the middle of the spectrum with the whole grains, the vegetables, and the beans, and meat if your particular constitution and blood type need it. Or if the situation in your life you need meat, maybe if you're recovering from an illness and you need to gain weight, or you're working hard and you do a lot of physical energy, or you're pregnant. So to look at the whole picture is very important for us individually, but I just love this book. So Christina Turner's great, and so is Paul Pitchford with Healing with Whole Foods, and he goes into the details of Chinese medicine through how Chinese medicine is the root of this practice and this study. And you can go through and study it, or you can just look up liver syndromes or the blue-green algae, the superfoods, through all these different, he has a page on chlorella, a page on spirulina and its effects and what kind of body types it benefits and why people take it, why it's so good for us. But you can also reference any disease or illness. In the index is about 20 pages long. So you can reference any food and its healing effects and how it works for certain body types, or you can look up any disease and find the foods that help balance out and bring the body back to balance. So I highly recommend this one too if you want to have it for I used it for reference for like 5 or 6 years, and then I started really studying it. But I'm so glad I bought that book. It's helped me in my life a lot. So what we'll do now is add some vegetables to our stew, because our ground spices and yams have been cooking for about 10 minutes in here. And this was on a low to medium simmer for about 50 minutes. The last 10 minutes, I've added this sea vegetable and yam, and now I'm going to add in our celery and mustard greens. And we have someone that's going to eat with us afterwards that can't have tomatoes because they're a nightshade, and tomatoes, nightshades can exacerbate pain in the body and aren't good for certain people. So that's potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant. Those are all in the nightshade family. So people with like chronic arthritis or any kind of chronic pain probably want to stay away from too many nightshades. Also, they say in macrobiotics that nightshades lend themselves to being a little bit more spacey or kind of right-brained, not being real grounded, and they're very yin, so they cause energy they're very expansive. So if you want grounding focus, eat more root vegetables like carrots and burdock root. I think I gave myself just enough room in this pot for all these beautiful veggies. But the greens cook down so much. If you have a mountain of greens, they'll just sink down into there. They become about a third of their original size. So we'll be adding our dill or tarragon, or even basil works great with this ground mustard and cumin and coriander combination. Oh, this looks so good. See our kombu sea vegetable there, giving us trace minerals. Oh, I've said this in the previous video because we focused on sea vegetables a lot, but sea vegetables help the body to expel both heavy metals and radioactive substances. So as we live in this nuclear age and more of us are exposed to trace amounts of that, sea vegetables, you know, small amounts of sea vegetables regularly in the diet help expel those from the body. And the trace mineral content of sea vegetables is like different than that of land vegetables. So they help the skin and hair and intestines, and they're wonderful for so many reasons. They also have a calming effect on the moods. So they're calming to the inner sea of emotions, and over time they can help calm hyperactive kids, which is great. Little tarragon. So this ground, or the leafy herbs, which go in at the end with the greens, what we're adding is, we added a little tarragon and now dill, and a little bit of sage, ground sage. But if you have basil or marjoram, those are two others that go great with the ground cumin and ground mustard. So good. And we're gonna give one of our people here that's helping make this video, we're going to give him a separate serving before we add the tomatoes, because he can't have nightshades right now. So after we add our ground, or our leafy spices, we're going to add some balsamic vinegar, maybe 2 or 3 tablespoons. So good. And our shoyu sauce. Oh, and our butter. Let our butter melt in there. You could use butter, ghee, olive oil. So I'd normally use, this is about 2/3 the amount of butter I would normally use for a pot this big. I'm also going to use a little bit of olive oil to kind of make the fat go a little further, because you want to add your salt and fat to the end of your beans to give it flavor and a satisfying quality. So if you don't add fat, you guys are going to be hungry in another 30 minutes. So we'll have a little olive oil too. So good. I'll show you. This is our salt. We'll stir it all in. Take it off the heat. It smells so good. I wish you could smell it. And we'll take our friend's non-nightshade bowl. We'll give him a serving separate. You can use fresh tomatoes, and you'd probably want to put those in 10 minutes before it's all done with the yams and the ground spices if you used fresh tomatoes. You want them to cook a little bit, but it's easy to add just a nice can of diced unsalted tomatoes. And also, what I've done is I picked up two of these, 14-ounce cans. Yeah. So 2 14-ounce cans of diced tomatoes and 1 can, a small one, of the tomato paste. And that gives it this nice, wonderful, tomatoey Boston baked bean flavor. So the tomato paste I mixed up with the other can of diced tomatoes so that the tomato paste wouldn't be like chunks of tomato paste in the stew. It would, get everywhere. So I thinned it out with the other can of diced tomatoes. So now we have this nice Boston baked bean vegetable stew, is what you could call it, with sea vegetables. And of course, the vitamin C in a tomato, you can never cook away the vitamin C in a tomato. It will always be there. So the vitamin C in the tomato helps you assimilate the iron in the black beans and the mustard greens. Because we want to have iron foods with vitamin C foods and calcium foods with magnesium foods. I think I'm going to talk about that in another video, but in regards to calcium absorption meals, brown rice is full of magnesium. So if you combine the unhulled sesame seeds or cashews or Brazil nuts, or even almonds are real high in calcium. In some schools of thought say that the plant sources of calcium are superior to lactose sources of calcium. So eat your brown rice with your nuts, your high in calcium nuts, and maybe your calcium supplement at that time, and you'll be good. And your iron foods with your vitamin C foods. And iron foods are like, the highest in iron foods are like beef and liver. And then plant sources of it, of course, are black beans, I think raisins, dark leafy greens, of course. Oh, doesn't this look wonderful? Voila! Boston baked bean vegetable stew with sea veggies. Voila! Thanks for getting this video. I hope it feeds you and your family really well.